Hi, everybody. This is the John Crow, and what I wanted to do today was to do a little breakdown of this latest Round 21 Game Jam and talk a little bit about what I've learned over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks. Uh, it was a pretty intense game jam, right around Christmas time, but seems like most of the world was locked down again, so it was a perfect time to just bury oneself down in the cage and just create. And user Alimus and I were chatting offline, and he made sort of a statement. He's a Unity developer and used to coding, and he's excited about the idea of adding code. And he basically said something to the extent of, where else can I get a seashell to talk to a calculator, to talk to a tree, to get it to move? And I guess the answer to that is the sandbox, right? The idea that we're visually connecting objects together and using messages to string them is just super cool, and I think that's what's appealing to a lot of users. If you ever read Mel Slater and the Elemental Theory of Presence, interacting with real tangible things helps to create more concrete memories. There's a lot of studies behind that. So this visual way of building in the sandbox is just, it's super cool, and it's obviously unlocked like a lot of passion in people who for building these kind of things. For me, and as I'm sure it is for a lot of you, it's kind of Lego meets Minecraft, in kind of a way that rekindles that childlike feeling in us. In any event, let's get started. So, if I could play Share and I could turn back time, the things I would change. The first thing I recognize is the value in getting people to play test your games, and that wasn't really possible in this game jam just because of the late assets and probably just a lot of stuff that's going on at the sandbox and lack of resources or staff at the time or whatever. But I've talked with some of the staff, and they are aware of this idea that it would be useful to have perhaps a submission day, and then perhaps having a day or two of play from all the users, getting some feedback, and having the game makers make those changes. I think it would produce some better quality games where small little things that bog people down don't just break the game right away. So the second thing I learned is you should have Cyber Dragon play your game, because he'll break it in about 30 seconds, even though you didn't see it coming. I had him game test mine last night. Thank you so much for that. It was super awesome. It's just amazing how people that don't think like you, or maybe we do, maybe we think a lot alike, but just somebody in a different body using a different brain will do things completely different. It never occurred to me in golf to kind of just like run to the end here and go and jump into the drink, because you don't do that in golf. But Cyber Dragon comes at it laterally, of course, and he's testing all the possibilities out. And this opaque block was my nemesis. He ended up in the drink there, I guess having a swim. I think you're from Australia, Cyber Dragon, if you're watching. I'm not sure I trust these kind of like pond side beds. I'm sure they'd have crocs down there. In Jamaica, we don't have those things. Anything big is dead. So yeah, this opaque block was a bit tricky, because although it looks like I've got this one block up, my character's actually sitting down here, and there was just no way out. And funny enough, I caught that problem in the actual course itself. So if you jump in, I'm on a 1x4 here. I actually had that problem when I ran a couple of playthroughs, and it was in this third hole fronting water hazard area here, and I ran into the same thing. So I had to go back in, and I feverishly added in some steps for them to get up, kind of like lily pads, and I actually closed down a lot of this. So if you're using these transparent blocks, it's so much easier to see if you're not meeting that one block height that a character can walk over. 2 blocks, it's the kiss of death, and thank you, Cyber Dragon, for finding that, but curse you as well, too. My fault. The problem with it is that you had to actually finish this practice hole before my gate would let you gain entrance. The point of my practice hole was to give you experience with my putters, as well as some of the other devices that I have in the practice hole, and actually on every hole, such as the ball marking, which is a standard in golf. I assumed that would be something that people would gravitate to, and kind of like, oh yeah, the ball marker. But again, assuming, kind of, what's the saying? Assuming makes an ass out of you and me, more out of me than anything. But for some reason, when Cyber Dragon tried this, my expectation was people would get up on the tee box. This is my tee box here because it's kind of how you play golf and tee off. And for some reason, he was drawn towards this. So that was my communication problem. And I tried to actually build a lot of my game around giving people instruction to begin with. It's not easy to hit a golf ball in the sandbox. It was never really intended to do that. I caught one of Cyber Dragon's earlier videos on making a gun, I believe it was, and he kind of got it working. And then I worked at it for a few days, and I just kind of kept working at it, and I miniaturized it. And the only way I could really figure out to interact with my golf clubs was through two objects, a picker, where you'd actually pick up and move the ball, and then an actual shoot knob. And in hindsight, this should maybe be red and maybe this should be blue so that you can differentiate them. But when they're sitting in the golf rack, they just don't come across. And so, again, that would just be a tip. If you're building mechanics that you really need to draw people towards, and they're the crucial mechanic that's used to get your game working, then you need to be absolutely clear with your user. And again, in the beginning of my game, I have a lot of this. Asker pops up, I say something, you have 4 options. And each of the 4 options takes you to either an OK button or to another page with another 4 options and another page with another 4 options. In hindsight, you might have one of those, possibly a speaker with a little thought bubble or a speech bubble there. But I prefer the Asker because it forces the user's attention if you need to pass on vital information in a way that can be easily missed with the speaker, with the thought bubble. So that's just a thought there. How would I do this differently? I would probably have left just one golf club. I think even coming in here and having, what is that, a 70-meter club, a 40-meter club, and like a 20-meter club. I basically wanted to have kind of like 2 different trajectories. So you could hit short and then also hit like long and high, and to experiment with that. But I think even just one club sitting right here, right in front of you on the practice green would have been ideal. One of the things that I think going forward will be interesting is I did build a version of this that actually had the pickable and the shoot button working, and I actually got that working quite well for another experience I'm working on. However, I think in hindsight, giving something like a bit more distance between these two would make it easier. I found that as I was tapping like my left-right controls, the character kind of shuffles or ambles, just, I guess it's a block. I don't know exactly how much they move whenever you tap the controls, but you do need to be quite sensitive on these controls. And I think as I'm working on my next version of Jamaica Golf, I'm going to reconfigure how these clubs work, and I actually have a pretty good idea of how to really improve on them. These are, I guess, a version 2.0 of my clubs. My version 1.0, if you're playing the game, are back here. These are the original clubs that I built, and they hit a whole variety of distances. Basically, every range in a golfer's arsenal would be sitting here, but they just didn't work. And about 2 days before, I saw some user posted a video. I can't remember, it was a golf course as well too, and it was just a really simple technique he was using, but it was effective. And so I cribbed the idea of just having an alignment tool, this kind of like series of arrows to help you kind of align the golf club. So just to summarize what I'm getting at there for what I learned from this and how you can maybe benefit from this going forward is if you've got a mechanic that is your game, because, for me, the mechanic was hitting golf clubs, right? Nailing down that one mechanic and doing it really well. And I think this game does it well, but it's not communicated right at the very beginning. And so that's something I'm definitely going to change. And that's something I hope you take away from this bit of kind of free thought, I guess. I'm just kind of going off here. So there's that. Just again, as an example of too much talk, when we start the game, you're welcomed here with some information. When you walk close to this, you're greeted with an asker telling you how to use the clubs. If you walk close to the shop, Jamar over here will talk to you and ask you if you want to learn more about collectibles. When you come over here, you're asked if you want, or asked, you're told how to use the ball marker, which I think is very cool. This is actually I'm very happy with this one. It was a very simple little fix to make ball markers because you have to pick up your ball on my course. But again, too much information. You can see I've got one, two, three, four pieces of information. And if you look over here, there's a market woman. She kind of wanders around, and she even has something to say about this as well. So you're not even like 30 meters into the game, and you're just being barraged with information, right? So keep it simple. That's the best I can offer there. And again, just to keep it going, he speaks to you, and then the putters tell you what's going on. My course tells you what's going on. Basically, everyone's talking to you. And in Jamaica, we love to talk, but it might be a bit much. So yeah, definitely something to improve on there. So definitely have Cyber Dragon review your game. Let them break it right away. But the main takeaway is get other people trying this, take their honest feedback, and implement it. Games and any kind of visual process like this is all about iteration, and you need iteration. What I released might have been like a 0.7 in terms of what 2 weeks gives you, and spending the next months really polishing it and ironing out all the kinks. That's really what development is about. Kind of like how we're in the alpha right now in the sandbox, right? You're going to go to a beta cycle, and then you're going to go to pre-release, and then you're going to go to a release candidate 1, release candidate 2, and these games follow the same way. So for many of us, it's not the end of the road. These games are submitted, but we will continue to build them. Mine, not coincidentally, will be released on 4/20 if I can find a 1x4 estate holder. I reached out to Snoop Dogg and Snoop Lion. I think this experience might work well in his lands. I only own a couple of lowly 1x1s, so Royal Jamaica is officially not going to be published until I can dig up a 1x4. It's kind of an odd size, but it worked for the course. Okay, let's see. What else do I have in here? So the lure of opaque liquid blocks, we talked about that. The future period where we can actually submit the games, get feedback on them, have some peer reviews from our friends, gentle jibing and what the hell are you thinking kind of conversations. The next thing that I wanted to look at here was this idea of optimization. This, I think, really killed my performance, which is really intended for people on pretty high-end gaming PCs or VFX 3D laptops. I come from the VFX 3D industry, and I'm using a pretty high-end PC, and I expect most gamers these days are on high-end PCs. So people that are not running, I'm running a 3090 eGPU with two twin 1070s and an Origin laptop here, and it's not new. The eGPU is, but the Origin laptop crashes on me, and it's a couple years old, and even then it still it labored a little bit. So I can only imagine how it might play on some of yours. And so what I learned is be careful with your assets. The problem with each of these assets is we're looking at 16K. That's 16,000 faces for each one of these. At least let me just double check. I'm going to jump into Vox Edit and let's just verify that. But even these palm trees really were not the issue. What's an issue, which most people hopefully will get a chance to see, is my Royal Poinciana tree, which is kind of one of the biggest trees we have in Jamaica. The cotton tree is also one of our massive trees as well, and I really wanted to give the sense of scale. Unfortunately, it's big. So the trunk for this Poinciana base is 13,570 faces alone. I don't know what that is in voxels, but probably pretty big. And each of these branches, so there's a secondary limbs. And actually, if I go and look at the hierarchy, so oops, and that stickiness here drives me crazy. It's something that's caused me a lot of stress. So yeah, if you look in the outliner, or sorry, the hierarchy, here's my Poinciana base. I'm a big fan of parenting. I'm going to hit Control-Alt-D, and it's likely going to duplicate this. I'm just going to try it anyways. If you're not parenting, kind of creating your hierarchy like this, then you're really not able to, just delete that now, you're not able to move your asset around. One of the problems with the parenting, of course, is the bigger your project gets, the harder it is to parent. A little tip, if you actually drag your asset out and up, you can parent it very quickly, and oftentimes you'll get stuck if you're just trying to drag up on top. You can see that they won't parent. I could drag this for probably an hour and it won't parent. But if I drag it out and up, now it won't. There we go. See, in a second try it does. But getting back to this, a 13,000 poly base, each one of these branches here is, and actually this branch is a compound, so I have a lot of sections where if you look, there's it's like a lower limb. So if I can pull that one out here. There we go. So my lower limb is actually a compound element. The lower limb is about 2,000 faces, and on it I have a bunch of separate upper branches that I've parented, 4 or 5, and each of those branches is a given number of faces as well. So let's see if I can't open one of these up. So you can see on my rig, the base of the tree, it might take a while for the face count to come up. There we go. So you can see it's a 13,000 face tree alone, and it's a compound. It's built up of modular pieces. That's how I build. I do a lot of L systems in visual effects and computer graphics for doing trees, molecular cells, things like that. And so this is kind of building L systems. Trees are built off of L systems, rule-based systems. And so I've got a trunk that makes up a number of slices, so you could go in very quickly and make variations on your tree just by posing the different parts of your rig. So you can see actually my rig here is quite intense. Don't get me started about the frustration of parenting and dragging and dropping in VoxEdit. That's another issue that needs to be solved. But again, I digress. If you have a look at my, let's see, I open up. The names here are also kind of annoying. You either have to shorten them or not. And if you don't shorten them, let's see, I can't find my asset now. Should just be called Poinciana. Okay, I'm not going to go any further with that unless I can find it really quickly here. Marketplace, platform. Yeah, I just can't even see the name, so this makes it really hard to deal with. But getting back to this, we're now looking at probably about 200,000 faces or 100,000 faces for one tree alone, because it's made up of probably about 40 different elements, and if you average them out at 5K or 16K, that's going to add up pretty quickly. And I've also got like lots of them. So just for fun, I went in and I started like deleting some of my assets. This is one of the things I like about parenting, is if you actually just there we go. I can just delete the parent and that whole assemblage goes away. Whereas in this one's case here, I don't believe it's parented. Nope, this one's parented as well. So you can see I took the time to parent there, and it deletes really quickly. But when it comes to trees like this one, I couldn't parent anymore because of that very issue I was talking about. So just to give you a sense of what I mean by over assetting your environment, this is a case of over assetting. And this brings up something else. I think I deleted something I didn't want to there. This brings up something else I'm going to talk about later, which happens to deal with LODs. I think LODs, or at least zone spawning, is a concept many people should probably try and take advantage of. I think the folks that are doing those platform type games where the character doesn't move and the platforms are what are moving by, kind of like the old 2D animation trick, they have the right idea in terms of being able to pull far greater asset amounts or polygons in a scene, faces in a scene, because they are by nature moving the platform past you, killing it, and then respawning it so it can kind of keep cycling, like the old cycloramas, right? In animation, these are fun things that we do a lot, creating those cycloramas, and so it's a really great strategy. But I'll touch on that in a minute. But again, getting rid of all of this, I'm just going to take you into the game maker. So anyone that's played my game, check out the difference. And so this is painful having to delete this, bit by bit. This really is the poster child for parenting. Although I imagine some of those platforms in some of those kind of ski, snowboard type games that are being created I imagine that those parenting must be obviously pretty insane in those as well. There must be hundreds of assets parented, and I think I recall some people mentioning that. So check this out now. If I play this, so tab in, and I'm not going to save because I do want to find kind of a happy ground. The load time is like really fast all of a sudden, but more importantly, I'm just gonna wait for this to start and get through all that. I'm just gonna get rid of my broom. Where are you, broom? And that away. There we go. So these switches, I'm going to talk about those in a second. These are not part of the game at all. But look, like hitting a club now, if I pick that club up, you'll see the latency that many people were having in the game is no longer there. Right? So it's like way more, and it's still a bit laggy. If you go back to some of my early experiments, the smoothness of the club is quite, it's like butter. Who is it? It's like butter, baby. Someone said that. I can't remember who, some movie. But, it was really buttery, and as soon as I started adding assets, that compromise between too much, not enough, that's the battle that starts to be played. And Gickus warned me of this about 2 days before submission, and I recall almost like a chastising mail, which I smiled at, and I took it well, and it was like, dude, this is Sandbox. And I was like, but and he's right. He's absolutely right. The game is designed for a certain style, and I'm hoping we can start to push the envelope on assets like this soon. One of the things I learned about voxels, I'm not sure if anyone knows, is that they more closely represent some of the building blocks of nature, and so you can scale voxels up. And so I'm not sure what you would consider Sandbox, like 16-bit voxels. Is it 32-bit voxels? Is it 8-bit voxels? I mean, it's quite detailed for pixel art, but can you imagine if we could double the amount of detail in an asset? And that LOD, if you will, with regards to voxels, is something that voxels can do that polygons can't. I remember reading this in one of the, where was it? It might have been the Octane, Jules Urbach. He was talking about the Octane renderer and photons and something about voxels and how they closely represent how molecules work and interrelate in the real world. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. So again, you can see a big performance, right? And if I started deleting a couple of trees, and just start blasting a few away here, so I'm just going to get a little bit really crazy and reckless. And again, just noticing, I just don't want to hit I'll get rid of all this too. Again, I have some stuff hidden underground, so whenever I do stuff like this, I just want to make sure there's nothing in the line of sight. There's nothing worse than deleting logic. And that's another kind of rant that I have about building. It's really volatile when you get down to the crunch, and you're just terrified of clicking and selecting something that's way off in the distance here. I wish there was like a clipping plane or a lock button you could use to toggle certain kind of selections off. So here, I'll get rid of all that, and I'm just going to get rid of this. I thought I had one more tree here. Did I get rid of all of them? So all the poincianas are dead. Right? And you got to have a poinciana on a Jamaican golf course, right? At the very least, like a cotton tree. And these are iconic trees in Jamaica. So, okay, so I'm starting to pare down now, and this might still be too much. Let's get rid of some of these bamboo trees. There was a lot there. I was a bit ambitious with that. Okay, maybe there. And so the game starts to look pretty Spartan when you're on a 1x4. But this is, again, an experiment just in the name of efficiency. I just want to see how much more performance I can get out of my clubs, because there was a time when they performed really well, and this will be the kind of end of my LOD portion of what I learned. There's still a lot more that I think many of you could take away into further jams. Okay, so let's try this now. So I've really sped up my map. I can actually feel it's more responsive. Let's tab in. Again, Adam, that's my name. Don't save. Let me just quickly get rid of my inventory. It's that one. You never see this one. It's a 12 try. It's a talking stick, a Rasta talking stick. It was kind of like a tool of democracy in the African empires, the Kush and Nubia. That's how they would control the government. Whoever had the stick got to talk, and that's kind of the way it works. Pretty cool. So let's grab that club again, and let's see if we remove some of the latency. Again, you can kind of already feel the responsiveness over the shooting. And again, you can see I'm kind of gaining a few cycles here. So I imagine, once again, if you keep paring down, removing leaves, removing trees, that's going to be something to definitely speed up your games. And I definitely think that as I release the 1.0 later on in the year, around 420, I'm going to have to start making some compromises. And I might even just rebuild this game from scratch and build it on a smaller 1x1 and just have a few holes. Maybe it'd make it a bit more intimate, but it should perform better. So again, be careful when you're working on anything larger than a 1x1. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to touch on here, and actually one more thing. There is a user on Discord. I believe his name is Crescent. And if there's an example of too many assets, which I am very guilty of, he or they were as well. I think they were really coming at this for the first time and treating it like I treat a visual effects in 3D shot, where you try to layer in everything, right? You're trying to like make it as rich and as detailed as possible, and he went over the top. I think he was trying to hide every single block in a 1x1, and I think he might have succeeded in doing it. But I recall as the jam came to an end, he couldn't even open his scene, so I'm sure he's taken from that. And Crescent, if you're watching, big ups, man. Let's see, what else? So, name everything. I can't tell you enough how naming everything, having a consistent naming scheme helped me. So, for example, let's look at one of my clubs. This element right here is my parent. So this essentially moves the golf club around. And so this is club 8. So if I quickly do a search for it, you can kind of see how my hierarchy works. If I go C8 underscore, this is the hierarchy I use. I'm going to hit Control D here, and it might wreck this, but this is the hierarchy for one golf club. So you can see we've got the parent here, and then you have the indentation. I truly don't like how the Sandbox visualizes this. I'm used to a hierarchy, parent, indentation for a child, and then if you have grandchildren, it kind of keeps stepping in, kind of like what's happening in VoxEdit. When we look at the hierarchies here, this is very clear, not so clear. But you'll notice that the one thing I have going on here is I've got a root to every one of these. So when it comes to parenting them, I can use my filter. So you can see at hole 1, I have a club 8 as well too. At hole 2, I have a club 8, and this one is a 60 to 70 meter club. It really made it easy for organizing and finding things. So definitely name everything so that you can track everything, which means you need to parent everything. I have a little list here. So yeah, don't overtalk. So again, I talked about this before. Too many askers. So yeah, ixnay on the octave. And the idea here is show people. We're a visual community. Sure, we have askers. Sure, we have speakers. Show them. Don't tell them. People don't like to read. And, I should know this because I'm a teacher in university, and my students don't like to read. They like to look at things. They like to watch videos. I mean, some of them love to read, but the majority of them, are here because they want to play a visually compelling game, and they don't want to go and read 50 billion different text box options. I mentioned the asset sizes in VoxEdit. So VoxEdit does allow you 16K, but as was alluded to earlier when I was talking with Gikis, try and keep objects around 2 to 5K. I think that's what he suggested. I don't know that for sure. You can hit him up and maybe we can have a conversation on Discord about that. What else? Dividing maps into zones. This is one thing I really tried to do when I realized that... Oh, my alpha gate's gone. When I realized that things were getting slow, I ended up actually having a number of objects ready to spawn here. I had a number of kind of listeners and I've got the trigger for hole 1. So as the alpha door opens up and you walk through the gates there's a listener here that detects the avatar and triggers the hole 1 quest. And at the same time, that same listener would spawn a whole bunch of foliage assets that I didn't want to necessarily have loaded into the game while I was playing over on the main course. At the same time, some of my foliage assets, I don't think, I do actually, I have a health component on it here. You can see that they have a death message on them that the minute I start hole 1, they should get killed off. And the reason I wanted to do that was to unload the assets I have in the practice hole so that I could free up some system resources for the rest of the course. So in hindsight, again, and I just didn't have time to implement this, and the parenting was getting really slow. My course is divided like this, where I've got hole 1, hole 2, hole 3 kind of comes around back there. Hole 4 plays from back, starting towards the front. Hole 5 plays into this zone. Hole 6 plays very long. And then hole 7 plays right towards the leaderboard at the end. So you've got the course laid out really well, and it works really well. But what I would like to do going forward, and of course, you've got the practice zone as well. So there's the practice zone, is to be able to load assets in at certain key points. So it makes sense that maybe right around here, you would load in these assets and kill any assets that might be back here around the start, the huts and things like that. And if I did that, I'd probably have to seal off the gate so that you can't get out while you're playing. Otherwise, the user is going to come back and it's like, where did everything go, right? And then as you end hole 1 and you putt out, maybe as you're walking to hole 2, maybe some of this could disappear here. You'll probably notice if you play the game, as you walk through this area, you're going to feel like a big pull on either the GPU or the CPU, and that's the spawning and the killing over here. So breaking this up into zones would be super useful, and it might mean that you need to mask out certain areas and hide certain areas, and I'm not sure how I would do that. I could use my big Poinciana tree, but it kind of defeats the purpose. When presets come, this would be easier because I couldn't spawn something like a Poinciana because of the fact it is in a very specific hierarchy. So that just wouldn't work. But hopefully presets will help that. LODs, I'm sure, are coming. Those will help as well too. So the fact that I could maybe make a low-res version at distance and have it kind of step up in quality would be useful. I think in Vox Edit, it does it automatically. You can't see, I don't think you can see it here. But somewhere over here, there's like a step up and step down function where you can essentially like subdivide your assets. And so the final thing I wanted to mention was distance. I've got my whole logic, which is over here. And I tried to, see how much moving my logic affected messages being sent between holes. So for my practice hole, which is here, I ended up moving all the logic kind of around it, and I'm not sure if it made a huge difference in terms of performance, but I do notice that hole 3, which is way down here, and if we look, this is like a 96, 96, say 96, so we're in 4 different lands right here. Getting, let's say, hole 3, which is right here, to detect where a club is on the course. So when I'm playing, my little avatar is sitting right there hitting his club. His club is sending a message way back here to hole 3 to increment the score, which is sending a message back here to update the scoreboard, and to right here to update the leaderboard. It just gets crazy. And I don't know what the answer is to that. Maybe it's something similar, that per hole I should be doing something like, and I think was it Cody and Lozine who did the shooting mechanic? I think they did something like this where they would kind of carve out like a little fortress of solitude for their logic, and they would build the logic in each zone, which seems pretty clever to me. And I think in hindsight I would do that as well. I think just towards the end of these projects, you feel like things could just, like, the wall could come crashing down at any second. And I was weighing the opportunity costs and the threats. I was doing a classic SWOT analysis of what if I move these and I break my scoring? Do I really want to go in and figure out what message I just killed? And I just didn't. So some better planning would help. Nonetheless, the last couple of points I'll make on mixing static assets, and I've probably blown everything away here, but let's just jump down to this first tee. So when you're on the first tee, you can see I have some of the bounding volumes of some of the animated ones I've deleted. The issue here is that when you have when you have an animated asset like this tree, the bound is the min-max volume of the animated asset. Whereas when it's static, it's actually watertight to the asset, so you get really accurate collisions. But the animated asset looks way better. So you're in this like push me, pull you, Dr. Dolittle kind of thing, right? Like, if you do this, I get this, but if I don't get that. And the animated one is a bigger hit because it's animated, and I have to track keyframes times, 100 leaves on the tree, and the flexing and bending, etc. And so my advice here is use your static and animated foliage as complements to one another. So maybe what I would do here is I'd have maybe a couple of foreground animated trees, and then here in the background is where I'd have static. So here you'd have kind of your animated layer, and here you'd have your static layer. For the animated layer, you'd have to turn the collisions off, and of course use like little boxes or something and stack them up that are proportional to the radius of the tree in this case, and then cheat the collisions. But what I really wanted to do here was to give like a really difficult shot through there and force the user to play the dog leg. I ended up having a lot of trouble with my water hazards. You'll see that they are an experimental feature on the main hole. They did not get implemented in the main course because they involved basically getting into all of this logic here and kind of piggybacking on top of it and intercepting some of the commands. And it worked, except I have a feeling that some of the kill commands and just something in it was actually causing multiple strokes to end up on the scoreboard. So that's something I plan on implementing more in a 1.0 release closer to 420, to April 20th. The last thing I have to say is more just like a request. I hope going forward that when we get a beta version of the Sandbox, that we are able to take really vital areas like this and lock them off so that we can't do anything to them. I mean, that shouldn't be that hard. I mean, it seems like a Photoshop, like pretty much all software programs can lock an asset from being deleted accidentally. That would be super handy in the Sandbox. And of course, if you can get some iterations on saving and versioning, that would help as well too. In any event, this was actually a really amazing contest. Keep in mind that in this alpha, the Sandbox wasn't supposed to shoot projectiles. And a video, like I said, from Cyber Dragon about the gun effect that you could hack out intrigued me a lot. I deal with rigid bodies a lot, as I've mentioned, and I put myself to the challenge of trying to control projectiles, and I think I did a pretty good job at it. And I think that's fascinating because it really increases the utility of the Sandbox way beyond what people thought it could do. I mean, it's an RPG for the most part, but when you look at the skiing games, the snowboarding games, the cycling games, the diving games, the flying games, the little hang glider there, boxing games, it's so much more than that. The ball games, I was at Gabak came up with that little Labyrinth game. It reminded me of that tilter game Labyrinth we used to play. Anyways, my point here is that we should all be pretty happy with where the Sandbox is, even in alpha. There is so much more that this last game jam has unlocked, I think, in terms of the capacity that we can create experiences in, and I can't wait to see what people create. So I'm the John Crow. I hope that this What I Learned video from the Round 21 Game Jam can be of some use to you. If you find my videos useful, give me a follow on Vimeo, hit me up on Twitter, on Discord. I'm on Instagram as adam.sale.876. That's the area code of Jamaica. Good luck in this upcoming game jam. I can't wait to see what people produce. And have a great day, everybody. Big ups.